Things in Portland are getting worse, not better. Someone has now been killed in our streets. There's no sign the violence is ending anytime soon. So now what? We took some questions to an expert who's been studying these protests since the beginning.
My prediction is that there's no end in sight. If anything, things will get worse.
Well, great. And not to be overshadowed, but we want to remember a Blazers legend who really made a mark both on and off the court. Here's the story. I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. I'll just tell you right away, I've been struggling since Saturday to find the words for this moment. I mean, before then, actually, because sadly, I think we all assumed we would be here eventually where somebody was killed during all of this, but I still don't really have the words. I mean, I have my opinions. You can just ask my wife or my dad. I haven't shut up about my opinions, but I'll be honest, they're pretty diluted in anger and frustration, so I'm going to keep them to myself for now. My instinct, honestly, though, is to blame someone, which is a pretty common instinct. It's a lot easier that way. I mean, just look at the statements we've seen from some of our politicians and our leaders. It's everybody else's fault, but that is not what woke me up in the middle of the night last night. You know, I woke up thinking about this show, you know, the one with my name on it back here, and all of the people at home that trust in us and watch us, and all the smart people who have something to say about the coverage here. And I wondered to myself, you know, could I have done something differently? Did I ask the right questions, interview the right people, hold the right people accountable, hold them accountable enough, or worse, you know, did something I say or some of the coverage we put on the air here incite people in any way? And I just don't know. I don't. I mean, I think about it. I think we should all think like that right now. And I'm talking to the politicians and the people running for office and really anybody with an opinion and an internet connection. Are you using your words responsibly? Can you make your point about what's going on in this city and in this country without making the situation worse? Are you being fair or just being frustrated? I tell you every night on the show that you have a say, that your words matter, especially now. Your emails and your questions, they help us frame our coverage and tell your story. So send us those emails at thestory@kgw.com. Find me on Facebook and Instagram, or use Twitter and the hashtag #HeyDan. So we should start tonight, I think, by talking about, of course, what happened Saturday night and what we know, because there's a lot of misinformation floating around. And honestly, in situations like this, where someone has been killed, shot and killed, it can be dangerous to identify the wrong people. So here is what we know. Just a few hours ago, police identified the guy who got shot and who died. This is 39-year-old Aaron Danielson of Portland. Joey Gibson, who is the leader of Patriot Prayer, says that he was a good friend and a supporter of that far-right group. And Patriot Prayer was part of that pro-Trump caravan that drove into downtown that night. Now, right now, as far as that is concerned, surrounding this man, that's all we really have confirmed. Now, here's what we don't know. Now, while we do know, again, that this happened between a fight between left and right groups, we don't know if that's actually what caused this, if it was directly a result of those clashes. Possibly it was an ongoing beef between two people or something totally random. I mean, we can speculate, but we just don't know for sure right now. Also, police haven't identified the shooter. They can find a lot of unconfirmed information on Twitter, but this isn't Twitter. Regardless, Portland is about as viral as you can get right now. The whole country is talking about us. I get a text maybe once a week from an out-of-state friend asking if I'm okay. I mean, they think that the city is in ruins or something. And because we are so close to an election, this has become a huge campaign issue on both sides. I mean, it's hard to believe in a lot of ways that one of the most non-swingish states in the country is suddenly ground zero for campaign fodder. These past 24 hours, President Trump and Joe Biden have talked about the violence in Portland through press conferences and social media posts. Both have condemned the shooting, but in different ways, with Biden accusing President Trump of stoking tensions and with the president accusing Mayor Ted Wheeler of not having control over his city. If you look at national outlets, you will see the same kinds of headlines on every website imaginable, basically framing all of this as Trump versus Wheeler, right versus left. We have a bunch of national reporters who are in town now, and at the mayor's press conference yesterday, reporters from those national media outlets only really asked Mayor Wheeler questions about the president's attacks on him. And as we get closer to Election Day, I'm pretty sure you're going to start seeing political ads using video from Portland if they're not out there already. Here's the thing, though. For those of us who actually live in Portland or near this city or work in this city, we know that the city isn't completely in ruins, and everyone knows that I'm just fine. We're not really looking at the nightly violence on our streets through the lens of a presidential election, but perhaps we should, because it matters now a lot. There are swing states with millions of voters watching this city, and what happens here could play a role in who they vote for. Portland has become a swing city, albeit unconventionally. So what are our leaders doing about it? Pointing fingers, a lot of them for the most part, with more calls for the mayor to resign. Meanwhile, Governor Brown says that she now has a plan that involves law enforcement from around the region. Problem, though. And to discuss it, let's bring in Pat Doors to talk about this, because now she's getting a lot of pushback on that move. Pat, what can you tell us?
Right, Dan. Well, the plan is relatively quickly falling apart. The governor is going to send state troopers to the city to help with some of the violence. She can't control that. She also asked Clackamas and Washington County Sheriff's offices to come help as well. About a half hour ago, they each said, no, we are not going to. So that is a big problem, because that is that could be a lot of people, a lot of manpower, woman power in uniform that could come here to help, and now that's not going to happen, Dan.
Do we have a reason why they're not doing it? Are we speculating here? What do you think? Why would they say no to come and help where they're needed?
Well, right. I mean, it's the sort of thing that law enforcement agencies typically do, not only in Oregon, but around the country. Of course, you help out your brothers and sisters in the uniform. But this is a remarkable rebuke to say no. And they're basically saying, hey, the violence in Portland is a result of the political leadership there demonizing the police. And because of that, they're staying away. They've also offered sharp criticism of the new district attorney in Multnomah County, who's announced he's not going to prosecute some of the most common charges that people are arrested on at these protests: interfering with police, disorderly conduct, riot. And so because of that, they're staying away as well. We have some specific quotes from the sheriffs of these two counties. We'll start with Pat Garrett from Washington County. Here's what he had to say. The lack of political support for public safety, the uncertain legal landscape, the current volatility combined with intense scrutiny on use of force presents an unacceptable risk if deputies were deployed. So they're not saying they're not available. They're not saying we can't afford it. They're saying we are not going into that environment that you folks have created.
Wow.
Craig Roberts from Clackamas County said something similar. He said the only way to make Portland safe again is to support a policy that holds offenders accountable for their destruction and violence. That will require the DA to charge offenders appropriately, and a decision by the Multnomah County presiding judge not to allow offenders released on their own recognizance, instead require bail with conditions. So that's the kind of thing that we're saying. I got to tell you, I've been working in the market here for 30 years. I've never seen that sort of public rebuke to the governor, and also to the political leadership and to the law enforcement, the judicial leadership here in Multnomah County. Dan?
I was going to say the exact same thing, because I don't ever remember law enforcement putting politics kind of in the way of what they do, which is to keep people safe and to uphold law and order. Have we heard anything back from the governor yet? I know you just said in the past 30 minutes this came out. I've been getting ready for the show. I've been on Twitter. Have you seen anything yet? Are we waiting to hear from her?
Well, a spokesman for the governor did email me and basically said, look, the governor has always supported enforcement of the laws for the serious crimes, and that the violence is something that she has decried over and over again. And that is true. I responded in saying, yeah, but these guys and women are saying it's the smaller crimes even that are allowing the protesters to be arrested, released, arrested again and released, sort of a catch and release, and that is part of the problem. Here's another statement that we got from the two major law enforcement associations for the state. It's from the Association of Chiefs of Police and the Sheriff's Association. They say a strong statement by elected leadership is needed at all levels that criminal acts are not legitimate protests, and that those who commit the crimes will be held accountable. Also, that there must be support for law enforcement actions through preventative detention and prosecution when criminal violators are arrested. And finally, there must be publicly voiced support for law enforcement and its efforts to protect lawful protesters and hold criminal violators accountable in a very difficult environment. So Dan, kind of what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing in the tea leaves here is these legal professionals are saying, you're running an experiment in that city. How are you liking it so far? And don't expect us to come in and solve it for you.
Massive statement. Unbelievable. Thank you, Pat. Appreciate it. We'll stay with you on the latest. And, there's more to talk about here when we discuss the governor's plan that Pat was mentioning there. Oregon State Police have offered over 24 body cameras. So you see a little bit of aid here. Body cameras and associated evidence management to the Portland Police Bureau, and the Bureau will evaluate their use. Now, right now, PPB does not use body cams. We asked the Bureau if they will take them up on this offer, and they said that they're having some conversations about it with OSP right now and the mayor's office, and they just frankly don't know yet. But we will keep you posted. So why don't Portland police wear body cameras? It's actually a long story. So how did we get here? In the fall of 2014, a federal judge urged the city of Portland to put cameras on its officers, even though the U.S. Justice Department didn't require it. The mayor at the time, Charlie Hale, said, sure, okay, let's do it. The Bureau set aside some money, and they held community hearings to get ideas. By 2015, everything seemed to be on cruise control. The Oregon legislature passed a bill that created statewide standards for body camera usage. Portland City Council put aside another $830,000 to put even more cameras in police cars, and the city pledged another $1.6 million to fund the program through the next fiscal year. But after another year and a different mayor, things hit a snag. Mayor Ted Wheeler questioned if the project was feasible and asked the police bureau for a detailed plan, including how much the cameras would cost. The police chief at the time, Mike Marshman, summed it up by saying, that's, in a nutshell, why we don't have body cameras today. But fast forward now to January of 2019, and there was another opportunity. Portland Police formed a team to finally come up with that detailed plan that the mayor wanted to see. And in February of 2019, the city held some listening sessions. This January, then Chief Jamie Resch said she supported body cameras and hoped to see a pilot program in the future. But once again, the plan hit the latest snag because we learned in April that the coronavirus had blown out the city's budget, and the body camera pilot program was one of the many things that ended up on the chopping block. And that's how we got here. Now, let's stay on the topic of police for just another minute and their response to all of this, because police brutality, of course, was the original focus of the protests, and for months now, they've been accused of using excessive force on protesters. I talked to Ed McGuire, a criminal law professor at Arizona State University, who's been following what's happening here in Portland since the start, and he has some ideas about how it may end.
So I think police should focus their enforcement efforts primarily on those protesters who are engaging in violent or destructive behavior. They should not ever be using force, less lethal munitions, tear gas, impact munitions, and so forth, or making arrests of people who are not engaging in violent and destructive behavior. And they need massive amounts of communication and de-escalation with the vast majority of the crowd that's not engaging in violent behavior. So essentially what we're talking about is differentiating their response into two pieces: facilitating peaceful First Amendment expression among those who are behaving lawfully, and making arrests for people who are behaving in a destructive or violent manner.
How is that possible, though, when you're looking into a crowd of people who are all dressed similarly, it's dark, there are fires being lit? How can you... Isn't that why police declare an unlawful assembly? Because they are essentially stating that we cannot look into the crowd and say, here is someone breaking the law, here is someone who is not. So people who are not breaking the law, you should leave because we're about to come out and arrest those who are.
Yeah, I mean, I think if police are making a lawful declaration of an unlawful assembly or a riot, then at that point they are justified in using force. However, I still think they need to use restraint. One of the things I've seen on a lot of videos, for instance, is bum rushing crowds that are retreating, and people who are sort of moving not quickly enough are getting, baton charged and things like that. I think the police need to really, and it's difficult in such a chaotic situation, but I think the police need to exercise a lot of restraint. I think one of the things I've heard from police chiefs all across the country that is that, police officers need to be really careful to avoid, the YouTube moment, the viral video, that instance where a police officer is using force in a manner that seems to be illegitimate or inappropriate, because that's what comes to define the entire police response.
We put a lot of emphasis on police and tactics and what they do to incite these things or to calm things down. Is it just on them? Will anything ever be resolved if we only focus on police, or does there need to be something? Does it need to be a two-way street where the people within these protests start to adapt and change their behavior, as well as the police in the way that they change and adapt as to how they police or enforce the rules within these protests and riots?
Right. That's such a great question. And so I agree with you on this, that, it's not only police. I mean, one of the essence of community policing is that police develop partnerships with communities and both sides take action to make their communities better. So we can apply those community policing principles here. So if the police can engage in a campaign to try to win back the hearts and minds of the moderate protesters, and they can start to build those relationships or rebuild them and establish trust with people who have a leadership position or an influence, have the ability to influence protesters, they could start to ask for things. Right now, they can't ask for anything because all that legitimacy is lost. They need to win that back with a massive communication and de-escalation campaign. And then as they win that back, they need to start working with protest leaders or influential people in the social justice community to say, how can we reduce the violence? They need the help of the community. They can't do this alone.
I want to turn now to a question that we've gotten a lot over the past 3 months. In fact, I think we got it once tonight. I was just looking at some Hey Dan comments a moment ago. And especially this weekend, we heard them. Joanna asked me, have you asked Ted Wheeler why he doesn't establish a curfew and arrest anyone on the streets of Portland outside of that curfew? So someone actually asked that very question this weekend during the news conference with the mayor and police chief. So here's what Chief Chuck LOVELL said to that.
We had a curfew early on in this, and it wasn't very successful. We still had very large crowds at that time, but I would say it's not something that's totally off the table, but it's not something I don't think we're looking at this moment.
Yeah, he's right. The curfew didn't really work. We've done some pieces on it here on the story. The mayor put one in place a few nights at the end of May after the first destruction downtown, but no one really followed it, and they ended the curfew because nobody was following it, and it wasn't making much of a difference. Now, at the top of the show, I asked people to consider the words that they use, how you use them. Easier said than done. Trust me, I know. And there's a good example of that maybe on my Facebook page right now. We got a ton of reaction from it this weekend. There's a downtown hardware store advertising for protest supplies, so masks and goggles and things like that. And I'm still not quite sure how I feel about the whole thing. Part of me thinks it's a good business decision, right? Businesses need money right now. They're not advocating for any violence, only safety. But there's another part of me that wonders if it's appropriate, considering what the city is going through. If you have time, if you feel like it, hop on, weigh in, log on there, tell me what you think. I'd love to hear your perspective. And while you're there, hit that like button, because that page is one of the best ways to communicate with the show. Gentrification is a big problem in black communities in Portland. So we're going to tell you about a group that wants to fix that.
This is a very small step into righting those wrongs.
Plus, a lot of you had something to say after I talked about why athletes should be allowed to protest. When the story continues. Welcome back. I know a lot of you have a ton to say tonight, so please keep those comments coming on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and use that hashtag HeyDan. Now, I want to talk about a group working on racial justice in Portland, outside of the protests, specifically trying to combat gentrification in black neighborhoods. They're sprucing up black-owned homes in Portland for free. Here's Christelle Kumwe.
Born and raised in Portland, Randall Wyatt is no stranger to activism.
Dedicated my adult life to community activism and outreach and organizing through hip-hop primarily. I'm a hip-hop artist.
When George Floyd's murder sparked nationwide protests, Randall encouraged others to become stronger allies.
We need y'all to invest in our communities. I've always kind of been outspoken about social injustices and I've always been a type of person to take action.
Randall came up with a project aimed at protecting Portland's black neighborhoods, renovate and repair homes as a way to increase property values and deflect gentrification. He took his idea to social media.
People started sending in money, people started signing up. I think we had like 50 plus volunteers sign up in a week. And other resources just started pouring in.
That's how the soon-to-be nonprofit Taking Ownership PDX started in June. Since then, homeowners in Lens and Albina have seen the results.
We've done some interior painting, put in new carpets, new doors, door frames, windows. We also have done some landscaping jobs.
Taking Ownership PDX is now a community collective of businesses, contractors, neighbors, and even realtors who actually benefit from the gentrification of Black communities.
This is a way to say, hey, we have messed up in 8 ways to Sunday. This is a very small step into righting those wrongs.
Lauren Gaucher is a realtor and board member for Taking Ownership PDX.
This is me taking the profit I make off of this and funneling it directly into something that can be reparations for Black homeowners here in Portland.
It's that collaborative mindset Randall says Taking Ownership is all about.
That's the only way we're going to be sustainable on this planet as humans, to be real. Like, if we don't work together, we don't pull our resources together and build each other up, it's gonna hurt us all, ultimately.
Kirstel Kumwe, KGW News.
Maybe some of you saw my commentary last week on pro athletes and protests. If you want to check it out, it's on my Facebook page right now. Just look up Dan Haggerty, KGW. But I wanted to follow up on one of the comments that actually inspired that opinion. Someone emailed me and said, I think it would be far more productive if the pro athletes would contribute some of the millions they are paid each season to help the people they say they are supporting, to help them better their lives instead of not showing up for work. So I figured I should maybe just give a quick shout out to some of the charity work that some of Portland's most famous athletes do. For example, our franchise player for the Portland Trailblazers, Damian Lillard, launched the Respect program in his rookie season. Dame works with kids to get them to show up to school on time and to work hard and to be kind. Just this past year, Dame was focusing on Madison, Park Rose, and Roosevelt high schools. And then his teammate, CJ McCollum, has poured his efforts and money into the Boys and Girls Club of Portland, even helping to open up the CJ McCollum Dream Center back in 2016. And it was filled with new computers and books and learning tools at that Boys and Girls Club. So a really great effort there. And no, we don't forget about the Timbers and Thorns. Just last week, they heralded a volunteer program benefiting the community each day, helping clean up community gardens and create care packages for transition projects. I'm sure that they're always looking for volunteers. Now, while we're talking about sports, I want to take a minute and remember a Blazers legend. Cliff Robinson, or Uncle Cliffy, died this weekend. He was 53 years old. We want to go into the KGW vault, look back at his amazing life and career. The Blazers drafted him in 1989. He got a lot of attention right from the start. 6'10", he had the size of a center, but he was a skilled outside shooter. He played 461 consecutive games for the Blazers, which is still right now a team record. He helped the Blazers reach 2 NBA Finals in the 1990s. He also made an All-Star team and was the 6th Man of the Year in 1993. But Cliff was also known for a lot of stuff he did off the court. This tweet kind of went viral over the weekend saying Robinson has possibly the coolest Wikipedia page of all time. He appeared on the show Survivor. He went to North Korea with Dennis Rodman in 2014. After basketball, he became really involved in the marijuana industry. We actually caught up with him at a marijuana convention here in Portland in 2016, where he was a keynote speaker. He advocated for letting athletes use marijuana as an alternative to prescription pain meds, something that he did himself during his NBA career.
It's definitely controversial, but at the same time, I think it's a conversation that needs to continue to be had.
The NBA honored Robinson over the weekend, along with Coach Lou Olson and Chadwick Boseman before the start of the playoff games. On behalf of all of Portland, we're going to miss you, Uncle Cliffy. All right, get out your phone. Let me know what you're thinking on Facebook and Twitter with that hashtag HeyDan. We're going to read some of your comments and finish the story right after this. Hey, let's talk about some comments. You caught me in thought there just a second before we came back. At the top of the show, I was talking about kind of our responsibility, the words that we use, all of us, and I was kind of making it about myself, thinking, did I always use the right words on this show? And I got an email from Larry Keller, and he said, you're sounding kind of funky right now. It's not all about you, amigo. Fair. Larry, that's fair. And I was really just trying to communicate that it's not about me, but I think everybody needs to think about themselves and the way they're communicating, the things they're saying, and if they are helping the conversation. And that's a call to all of the political leaders who I saw kind of pointing the finger with their statements and the things they've been saying on Twitter. Everything that's happening is somebody else's fault. To every person who's just commenting on a Facebook page. Is what you're saying helping the situation, helping moving it forward, helping toward progress that we all want to see happen? Or is it just adding to the problems that we're dealing with and the division that is tearing us apart? It wasn't really meant to be about me, but I'm still working on this whole communications thing. Thanks for being with us tonight. That's the story. I'll see you back here tomorrow.